Thank you all very much for taking the time to attend this, our third session of our Building Bridges for Unity platform. And before I introduce Joris, our presenter this evening, I'll give you a brief overview of who we are and how we got started. So during COVID, April 2020, 5 of us Baha'is who are concerned with issues, problems of our time, came together on Zoom, and lockdown was sort of the impetus or catalyst for forming this group. Our aims and motivation was really to start reaching out to others, all of us, to trigger exploratory reflections, thoughts, not reductionism, not simple quick fix answers, but exploring together to find solutions, ideas, thoughts towards the betterment of our world, towards greater flourishing. So initially we formed a blog. It was called Search for Truth. We didn't go viral, to be honest. We had a few readers, half a dozen, not too many, but it was a start. And after about 6 months, we thought it would be a better idea to hold a platform such as this, where we can get together, listen to people's ideas and discuss things amongst ourselves. So why now, really? Well, COVID, climate change has taught us the interdependence between all nations. As we see, COVID, a virus, is not a respecter of boundaries. Our philosophy is that the Earth is one country and mankind its citizens, and we each have a role to play in that country. So to explain, if we think of a human body, if one part of that body is sick, with a migraine, with gout, with mental health issues, the whole body feels ill. So in this way, what affects one part of the planet is the responsibility of the whole, all of us. And we don't have to be experts, some of us are, but we just have to be concerned with the pressing and urgent needs of our time, the times in which we are living, whatever those needs might be. So this might just be an appropriate time, talking about human bodies, to introduce Joris Simaitis, who is presenting this evening. So we know Joris because his dad, Joris, is a Baha'i. He's a founder member of the Building Bridges group. He's a cardiologist at the hospital here in Cornwall, and he is well used to fixing bodies. His youngest son, Joris, has begun on a pathway to explore avenues to fix our planet. He is already extremely well qualified in setting out on this journey of sustainability. He's currently a PhD student at Bath University. He's particularly looking at circular economic strategies for sustainability. For those who may not be aware, the circular economy is designed to benefit businesses, society, and the environment. It seeks to disengage economic growth from the consumption of finite resources. This is in contrast with the take, make, and then waste model, the linear model that we have at the moment, which is causing many problems in the world. Joris is young and very well qualified to work and make a huge contribution in this vital area. He has already achieved first-class honours master's degrees in chemistry and engineering. He has won multiple awards alongside his team at UCL for their work in affordable, sustainable pressure cookers to prevent the problem of respiratory diseases caused by indoor cooking in developing countries. And finally, before you think of Joris as only focusing on academic matters, I can testify that whenever I saw him from time to time in Cornwall as a teenager, he would be wearing his football strip. He had a couple of injuries, I remember. At UCL, he took up rowing, and now he uses the gym a lot and has taken up kickboxing. So Joris will give us his presentation. After that, you're welcome to make any comments, ask questions, and Jeff Smith, who is a member of our team, will direct those questions. You can use the electronic hand or just get Jeff's attention in any way. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to you, Joris, and thank you very much for sharing your ideas, thoughts with us this evening.
Excellent. So, thanks so much for having me here. I was essentially invited, to give a talk on sustainability of the planet. I will disappoint you in that I cannot tell you how to make the whole planet sustainable. That is very ambitious. But what I can kind of talk about and for you kind of take away is more of this sustainable thinking and kind of mindset. So the way I'm going to cover this is essentially really kind of taking you through my perspective and my journey through kind of my sustainable development and my work. So chapter 1 is, what's my problem? So my journey really begins at UCL, where I studied the integrated masters in chemistry, which I was really excited to get. And I got to do a lot of experiments, I've broken a lot of flasks and glasses. I even got to go to Canada to do some really cool research on things like graphene for all sorts of biomedical applications in tumor imaging. Even, wrote my master's thesis. And of course, as any young student does, you have a photo shoot and occasionally you might be a little bit silly with it. But also, I was very good at it. I won awards. I have a lot of spin-off publications coming to it. But despite being a relatively successful student, and I kind of still felt like, I was kind of living in this void and I couldn't quite pinpoint, what was wrong with me kind of studying chemistry and being kind of successful in this field. So my feelings were kind of like, I was very focused on working a lot of advancing kind of, advanced public health, advanced sports science with my chemistry research, but also felt, in our westernized community, generally, most people are quite well off these days, and poverty is being quite eliminated in westernized societies, as well as racially and between many different people. Everyone these days has equal opportunities. So we're living a pretty good life. But that's kind of what bothered me. I kind of felt I was living quite highly privileged. I was kind of working on privileged problems. And, a lot of this is marginal impact research because, fundamentally, we've done a lot of the things. But what kind of was in the back of our mind was a few facts. So we know there's nearly 8 billion people now, which is absurd. But also, it's actually up to 7% people are still living below $10 a day. Up to 40% of people don't have access to clean cooking or electricity, relying on charcoal. And climate change is no longer coming, as I learned in my geography classes. It's already here as we're breaking heat records all over the UK, and we're getting some of the worst floods in the recent years. So I know I really kind of want to set out this journey on sustainable development, which is building a future considerate of social, so the people, economy, the profit, because we function over the economy, and most importantly, again, environment, the planet, which is our home. So this is where I go to kind of chapter 2, where I decided to make a change in my life. So I was in the UK and I decided to take a trip to Peru. It was fantastic sunset on the equator and it might look like I was having a holiday. But I was working in an NGO in a low socioeconomic context where there hasn't been very good infrastructure and it's been kind of let down by the government, with an organization called EcoSwell, was kind of bringing volunteers around the world to work on sustainable development projects of many types. There was kind of wastewater treatment, there was the solar distillers for clean water using solar energy, and even got to plant my first trees in a lot of reforestation projects, which was really cool. But there are some fundamental key learnings that I learned from this experience that were kind of shattered my perceptions before coming. First of all, sustainability is not a linear process. In a lower socioeconomic context, resources are incredibly limited. And essentially working with these communities was extremely challenging because they don't have basic education, they don't have basic organization, and communication was quite non-existent. So if you asked a fisherman to meet you at 1 p.m. somewhere, he may decide or not decide to turn up. And this kind of meant that all these sustainable development projects move very, very slowly. They fail continuously. And if they are successful, operation and maintenance is very, very difficult. Now, these were very, very important takeaways from the perception that we might have in more privileged societies when thinking about doing projects to help others in need. So a kind of primary example of this is the Engineering for People Design Challenge that happens every year in universities, getting loads of students to design really cool stuff to help people living in poverty. So I think this year's winner was some type of tree that has water in it. It has Wi-Fi, basically some advanced tree for communities to kind of center around and maybe charge their phones and get water and so on. But as cool as that kind of was, having been in that lower socioeconomic context and having known locals such as Tranky, who I knew who just wanted to play cards, he wanted to make omelets, and most importantly, he just wanted to drink beer and, talk with his mates. I know that community, if that tree was implemented, they would think it's absolutely bonkers and they would make fun of it. So that's why it's really important to know what's actually realistic in these scenarios. So these kind of challenges and these topics made me want to study this further. So I took a postgraduate master's in engineering for international development, again, kind of focused on lower socioeconomic regions, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as East Asia. And really this is looking, I'm sure all of you by now have heard the Sustainable Development Goals, but it was essentially looking how can we actually implement these in these lower communities. Well, my specific focus being on Goal 5, which is gender equality, Goal 7, which is affordable and clean energy, and 13, which is climate action. Now, what I specifically worked on this was these off-grid solar systems, which is essentially you get a solar panel that can generate energy and it can power maybe a little TV, it could charge your phone, and it can provide lights. And essentially you could install this in rural communities that doesn't have to be connected to the central grid. So they were accessible everywhere. Now, the kind of really innovation with these wasn't really the technology. This technology exists, there's not much more advancements to be made. This was actually the innovation in pay as you go. So essentially, it was providing energy for people who are living really close to the poverty line, not at the bottom of the pyramid, but quite close to the line. And essentially the innovation was in the business model. So the customers would pay monthly of $3 for 3 years that actually turned a profit for the business, instead of people having to pay $100 upfront because they would never be able to afford that, but $3 for 3 years was affordable in their income. And this very simple system actually had really cascading benefits in lower socioeconomic contexts. So for example, children could keep their lights on in the evenings and nights to read, study, and complete their homework. For gender equality, women themselves could not only now start to learn and work in the evenings, but the added light in the neighborhood made them feel safer and reduced instances of assault. For decent work and economic growth, this boosted the productivity for both the children and the women, which improved job prospects and income generating activities to boost the family's socioeconomic status. And for affordable and clean energy and climate action, it reduced the reliance on firewood, leading to less deforestation, and the electrification was by clean and renewable energy instead of maybe using a diesel generator later on. And inspired by this, the specific project that I kind of work on was an off-grid cooking solution, which is a communal electric pressure cooker that was capable of providing 25 meals. So you can see a very nice kind of sketch of what this looked like on the right with 2 big solar panels and this really big like communal-based cooker. And essentially it was kind of inspired by these subscription models or pay-as-you-go, and to make a kind of profitable business case for the business, but that's also affordable for Rwandan rural communities. And it was powered by existing renewable energy systems that are already available in those regions. And one of the most important things was that it was designed with the life cycle in mind. So using local materials and considering what's going to happen at the end of the cooker. So we were the winning team for this Efficiency for Access Design Challenge. And there are multiple reasons for this, despite not being necessarily the most engineered project. For example, we really focused on co-benefits. So again, with affordable clean energy, we're providing a renewable energy system for cooking, and it was affordable by the subscription models, so being accessible to families. For good health and well-being, well, our solution is eliminating firewood and charcoal, which is responsible for household air pollution, thus reducing a lot of the premature deaths that would happen in these regions due to dirty cooking. For 11 sustainable cities and communities, our whole business model was community-based, meaning it would incentivize local collaboration for sustainable energy practices. For goal 8, we had major time and cost savings that were required for kind of fuel collection, charcoal collection, let alone preparing in a conventional cooking, which is very easy to do with our cooker. And all these benefits would help with gender equality because they would uplift women and girls who are responsible for all these tasks in the Rwanda communities. And again, we benefit climate action because it's clean electrification, and we mitigate any deforestation activities required for kind of firewood collection. But in addition to this, with all these great benefits, arguably the most important things was that our pressure cooker, it wasn't actually disruptive to cooking practices. In fact, it was a lot easier than conventional cooking methods. And this ease of use meant the new technology, they wouldn't have to worry about operation and maintenance. And most importantly, these benefits were very direct and very visible to the customers because they wouldn't be breathing in fumes. They'll be saving a lot of money and having a lot of time. So there's some key learnings I got really from this course and these types of projects. First of all, in lower socioeconomic contexts, solutions cannot be too disruptive and they need to be more realistic, considerate of cultural norms, and really focus on convenience and making essentially a more attractive solution. And a solution that was designed for a single problem actually cascaded to multiple benefits to other problems, as you saw in the previous slide. So when designing a solution, it's really important to investigate all the co-benefits that can exist in this kind of systems thinking manner. And arguably, there was nothing crazy about the technology, nothing really innovative. The focus was on making it profitable and providing a solid business case, which is actually a complete deal breaker for sustainable development to be able to scale it in the economy we live in. So yeah, as to reiterate, the innovation wasn't in technology, but in the economics and the people. But still, there was kind of something in my gut telling me I have a problem with something else, as you can see. So chapter 3 is essentially kind of trying to find my place within the sustainable development. So there was a key thing that really, really stood out to me during this course, and it was this climate inequality. So 10% of the world's richest are responsible for over half of the CO2 emissions that cause climate change, while the 50% of the poorest people are responsible for under 10% of climate change, which was absolutely bonkers for me. And one of the reasons for this is, of course, we know about the Industrial Revolution, where we managed to achieve economies of scale with our manufacturing and kind of products and really push a lot of our Western economies upwards in development. But this also relied essentially on really cheap fossil fuels, combusting them as much as possible to get as much energy out. But essentially, we actually built the foundations on this. So we as a Westernized community are in a fossil fuel economy lock-in, meaning it's very, very difficult to get out. But while doing this, developing countries such as Sub-Saharan Africa have been kind of left behind in this sense. Now, the key kind of fossil fuels, in case you're not too familiar with them, there's 3. Essentially, there's natural gas, there is coal, and there's oil. So just a kind of simple illustration there. So with this climate inequality, it was that climate change was being accelerated by the global north or westernized societies, where its consequences are actually experienced less. While the global south, so a lot of developing countries who are not primarily responsible for climate change, experiences its consequences the worst. And to kind of illustrate this, I have 2 kind of map graphs. So this first one is showing the population of people that are below the poverty line. And really simply, we can see there's a lot of red in Sub-Saharan Africa, Central America, East Asia, and as well as somewhere in Indonesia as well. But now if we look at kind of a similar chart that I got off somewhere, which is the vulnerability to climate change, we can see that it is those same areas that are most vulnerable to climate change. So this is putting them in a pretty tough spots to be able to develop their economies further. So we are creating this political economy, asking big questions such as how responsible is the global north or westernized societies for actually helping the global south develop a clean and renewable future to avoid this fossil fuel lock-in. In addition, the global south, as you can see in the right graph with a lot of red in those same places, they're very, very rich in solar resources, which are renewable. So the question is, should they now do their best to avoid a fossil lock-in? Because it wasn't as possible in the westernized communities. But also, a fossil economy is cheap and highly effective, and it can lift millions of people out of poverty. Just look at China, which coal has essentially boosted them into essentially a superpower. So isn't it unfair to restrict developing countries to develop the fossil economies? And all these big questions are really set out by the Paris Agreement, which happened in 2015, bringing together global leaders to kind of tackle climate change. And essentially, 196 countries signed the agreement to limit global warming below 2 degrees Celsius and preferably below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And all parties pledged targets to move towards more sustainable practices in specifically energy and their consumption. And with the political economy discussed, also the global north was signed to also help with the sustainable development of the global south. For example, the Clean Energy Development Mechanism, which you could check out after this presentation. Now, what are specifically these 2 and 1.5 C degree targets? Well, very simply, this is by how much the Earth warms on average across all regions, but it varies regionally quite a lot. And essentially, throughout this graph, you can kind of see what kind of scenarios we could be aiming for. So if I take your attention to the right of the graph, as highlighted, under the current governmental policies, we are looking up to nearly 3 degrees Celsius warming, which isn't too good. With the Paris Agreement pledges that were made, we're headed for 2.4 degrees Celsius, which also isn't too good. So we can see we're quite way off the 1.5 degrees Celsius target, which is quite alarming, but there is stuff we can do about it. And essentially, CO2 is not the only cause of climate change. It's not the only molecule. So that's why you might see this description of CO2 equivalents. Of course, this means one CO2 or carbon dioxide molecule, but also we have other emissions that cause climate change, such as methane, CH4, which is 34 times the equivalent of CO2. And we have nitrous oxide, or NTO, which is 298 times the equivalent of carbon dioxide. With these emissions not coming from fossil-based sources, but actually coming from agriculture and fertilizer and so on. So that's just a quick note. So what are the culprits for climate change and where should we kind of focus our efforts on? As you can see in the kind of pie chart on the left, the one thing that stands out is energy, and again, which is linked to the fossil economy. 24% of these emissions is for energy that goes towards industry and manufacturing processes. 18% is how we use energy in our homes and commercial buildings. 16% goes to transport. And the fourth one is actually 10% from agriculture and livestock through the methane and the NTO emissions that I was saying previously. So what can we do about this? Now, my favorite analogy to this is a bathtub or sink. And imagine it is overflowing and the water is CO2 or CO2 equivalents. We have 3 options if our bathtub or sink is overflowing. We can either close the tap, we can drain the tub, or we can clean up the mess. Those are the 3 options that we have if our bathtub is overflowing. Now, a proactive climate strategy would try to close the tap, so stop emitting CO2, then drain the tub, so let's take the CO2 out of the atmosphere, and then the last strategy is let's clean up the mess that this made, so the consequences of climate change. And this is proactive, and this is essentially what we want policymakers to be doing and our world to be doing. But what's actually kind of really happening is we have a more of a reactive climate strategy. We'll probably try to clean up the mess first, then drain the tub, and then maybe close the tap. So this is kind of, a lot of how society is rigged and what I think might possibly happen, but I might be completely wrong. So what are our specific options that isn't just me making analogies? So for turning off the tap, we want to turn off the fossil tap. And what this means is very simply, we need to substitute this for renewable energy, most notably wind and solar. but they need to be coupled with something else, which is solving the renewable supply and demand. And what this means simply is the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. So we don't always have that power. So we really need to develop energy storage technology, which is most likely going to be batteries. For draining the tub, we can actually capture and utilize carbon artificially or naturally. Artificially, we can have these big fans that suck in and capture CO2, and we can store it or use it for something else, or naturally by trees, which is the most advanced carbon technology we have. Now, it's really important, of course, there's a lot of technology going in, and a lot of the time why they haven't been implemented all over the world, why they haven't been scaled, is because they have big green premiums. And what this means is they are incredibly expensive. So we want to focus on funding research in breakthroughs for reducing costs so we can scale up these solutions. And also kind of legislation and policy, we need to make sure we're trying to enforce fossil fuels and incentivize kind of these options. So this is pretty much as clear as it is for what we need to do. And it is quite simple as that, but obviously hard to implement. And this is essentially action at the source with a very visible impact. If you replace a coal power plant with wind power, that's a very, very clear impact. But what's not so clear is how energy is distributed throughout product systems. So let's take an example looking specifically at energy that is used for industry. So we have a product system. We use energy from industry to manufacture. This energy now is embedded in how we distribute the product, how we use the product going to landfill, and maybe it being recycled. So that energy for industry is embedded throughout the supply system. But also indirectly, for manufacturing, you need chemicals, you need machines and infrastructure. For distribution, you need trucks to be manufactured, parts to be manufactured, and fuel delivered. As you can see, this system can keep going and going and going. And every single one of these systems eventually leads back for the energy required for the industry as is embedded in the system. So any change in this system has direct influence over the energy that we use for the industry. And it's estimated actually 45% of our emissions could be changed or mitigated in how we use and consume products. So the key learnings is that energy is embedded throughout the whole product supply chain, and any shift in how we manufacture, use, or distribute products can indirectly now influence energy, which is very good. However, the problem is, as we saw with renewable energy, it's a very direct impact. This impact is near invisible. It's very hard to visualize. It's very hard to put numbers on it. And most importantly, it's very hard to consumers to see for them to actually take action. So meaningful reductions in product use is very difficult because we also live in a society that is very maximalist. So you want as much stuff as possible. Let's dispose everything. And, it's a very consumerist society that is linking, a lot of our happiness towards products and material things, which is a bit of an issue in this case if we want to kind of eliminate the emissions from the products. So I found myself at a crossroads in my sustainable development journey. I had explored international development on the left, I had explored renewable energy and technology, but still wasn't feeling right. But I was absolutely fascinated with what's ahead of me at the complexity of our products and systems and how we can use that to essentially help with climate change. So, and this led me towards trying to do sustainability in practice. So as mentioned, we live in a linear economy. What this means is, for example, in a supply chain, we extract resources as if they're infinite, produce, distribute, consume them, and then dispose them, assuming that they will infinitely somehow regenerate these resources, which can be named the take, make, waste economy. And this illustration on the left kind of shows at the top we have the mass, so the amount of resources that we extract in, and we can see the value or economic value, as well as the line below it, carbon, which is carbon emissions that cause climate change. They're all interlinked. The more mass we extract, the more value we create, but also the more mass we extract, the more emissions we have. So to kind of illustrate this, in 1997, we extracted 26.7 billion tons of materials. In 2017, this was 92.2 billion tons of materials. And by 2050, we could be extracting 184 billion tons of materials, which is great for economic value, but it's not so great for the carbon emissions that are going to follow. And of all these resources, 91% of all the resources we extract never return for resupply. They never regenerate. They're completely lost by us essentially completely disposing of them. Only 9% of all the materials we extract actually return to regenerate back into a product system. And the moment we lose a resource, we have to extract another one, which is more carbon emissions. So it's not too good. So as mentioned, this is the linear economy that we really live in, which is take, make, waste. But what we really want to move is towards a circular economy. One that isn't take, make, waste, but one that is take, make, sustain. So keeping products and everything in loops and essentially regenerating them. And there's three key principles that are set out for the circular economy. The first one is designing out waste and pollution. So making sure the products are designed to ensure they're not going to become waste or pollution, as it says in the tin. The second one is keeping products and materials in use as much as possible, because the more we use them, the less we have to buy. And lastly, we have to regenerate natural systems because we need to replenish our land and our planet. And there's, the key benefits of this is, as mentioned, we want to decouple economic growth from carbon emissions and from resource use. So as an illustration on the right, you can see essentially with the circular economy, we kind of flatten the resource use while still generating economic value. But in flattening the resource curve, we also have less carbon emissions. So we can reduce our environmental impact without actually compromising economic growth. So that is fantastic. And in many cases, circular options or circular economy options are more economical because they save a lot of costs. Because for products that you need a lot and maybe expensive and precious raw materials, if you keep reusing the same materials, recycling them, reusing them, you never have to buy another raw material ever again, which is fantastic. So to kind of give examples of what this actually looks like, instead of me just talking about the concept, for design out waste and pollution, I give you the example of a super sustainable Park 2020 business park in Amsterdam. So it's powered by 100% renewable energy, which is really great, but effectively the whole building is designed to be reused and recycled. And the way they do this is all the interior structures and all the brick pathways have been fixed by joints and bolts rather than glue and cement, which meant that it is really easy to disassemble the whole building, essentially like Lego or a puzzle piece, which is really simple, but super powerful. So the next building may be able to use the materials from this building if it has to be taken down, meaning it won't need new materials in the first place. For keeping products in use, I want to give the example again of a company called Bbox, which is essentially looking at those off-grid solar panels and solar solutions through pay-as-you-go business models that I was saying. So the way they achieve a circular economy in this is through their business model. So the business model is essentially a product as a service, or PaaS, which means that the system is owned, it's operated and maintained by Bbox, not the customer, because the customer is only paying for the service. Now, this is really great because the customer doesn't have to worry about maintenance and they can easily access servicing, which is the company's responsibility. So a company official would drive down in their moped to distribute the system, repair it, and make any replacements that needed at the tap of an app from the customer. And this is part of the circular economy because it means because the company owns the system, it is most profitable for them to maintain it, as long as possible. Whereas a customer, they might put it on their roof and it breaks and they don't know how to fix it and it becomes waste. So Bbox can maintain the products, not for just one customer, but multiple customers fully utilizing these products. And for regenerating natural systems, I'll give a very easy example. For example, in single-use cups, there are compostable cups, which are made with a polymer called polylactic acid, which is not only renewable, but it's biodegradable. So when you throw that cup in a field or any compost, it disposes and regenerates nutrients back to the land, which is really fantastic. And a lot of this can fit into a framework that's been developed by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, where on the left, you kind of have biological systems. On the right, you have these harder technical systems that we have, which I won't really go into, so you can go into after the talk. But essentially, the Park 2020 example on Bbox and lie on the right-hand side because they're hard technical components. whereas with the vegware compostable cups, they kind of lie in the more biological side, focus on regenerating the planet. But one thing is, how do we actually measure this? How do we actually see the value that the circular economy provides? As measuring things arguably the most important thing that we have to do. How do we convince someone the circular economy is more sustainable if we don't know the numbers? So a kind of joke that me and my friend had is, people would have, a brick concrete house or whatever. They'd put one solar panel on it, and they would say, fantastic, my building is now sustainable. Which doesn't quite work like this without the numbers. So this is a lot of what my work specifically focused on near the end of UCL, and a lot of the work that I'm focusing on right now in Bath. And it's essentially, how do we measure sustainability? So for example, if we come back to a product system in the supply chain, we go from raw materials, manufacturing, distribution, use, and then the product is eventually being disposed to landfill. Now we apply one maybe circular economy strategy. So we go all the way to the end, but instead of landfill, we recycle the system, regenerating the raw materials that we put back into this loop. And we have a third option. Well, maybe we're recycling, but after the use, maybe we are reusing or remanufacturing the product without breaking it down for recycling back into distribution and the use. So we are essentially regenerating these loops. But how do we actually measure this? And this is where life cycle assessment comes in, which is one of the most powerful tools we have for this. So again, in a product system, going from raw materials to manufacturing maybe a disposable cup to its distribution, essentially we can draw boundaries on maybe the manufacturing step of the cup. And what we do is take into consideration everything that goes into it. So we consider, for example, it might be cardboard, it might be paper, it might be plastic, it might be heat, electricity, and water. And essentially life cycle assessment now tries to link them towards an impact category. In this case, all of these associated with depleting our resources, which can be critical materials, metal materials, or fossil-based resources. But also on the other end, something else happens. We have outputs or we have emissions. So for example, we have multiple emissions, which also with life cycle assessment, we try to link them with numbers, how they impact different environmental impacts, such as global warming, such as air pollution, and such as contamination to land and rivers. And there is a big need to measure. So for one, we want to get some really pretty bar charts that look like this. So I just made this bar chart up, so don't take it too seriously. But essentially on the left, we have the kind of normal scenario, which at the top, the bright yellow shows, we are putting this material to landfill. So this is the conventional system. The second system now with the X lowers the overall emissions. So we apply a circular economy strategy. As you can see now at the bottom of the middle bar chart, we have a green, which is saying we're recycling these products. And then on the right-hand side, we have a second circular strategy, which we are again offsetting these emissions or reducing these emissions by remanufacturing the problem. So each solution lowers the global warming impacts less and less and less. Now, to kind of understand the importance of this, let me do a little cartoon for you. So we have two people, maybe business leaders, maybe policymakers, or maybe even just friends having a conversation. So the first person says, look, if we pursue the second circular economy option, we cut our emissions by 47%. Wow. The second person says, well, yes, but it's going to cost us 10% more. So I think we should go for circular economy option 1, which will actually save us costs by 5% while still having a 32% emission reduction. So we get the both of best worlds, environment and economy. But then the person hits back. They say, yes, that is true. But with stricter legislation coming in of what we can actually do in the company in 10 years of limiting our emissions, the second circular economy strategy is actually better for a long term for sustaining our company. And the other person then, okay, agrees. This is a really good point. So, I see your point, but also we can see that there's a really big red in our bar chart, which is the manufacturing step. And we can see that is contributing for most of the emissions in the system. So we want to think about, how can we reduce that bar chart as well? Essentially, what I'm trying to point out here is that, data visualization and quantification of sustainability is really important to have these conversations, which can't happen without any measurements. So while we need renewable energy, we need carbon capture, we need new business models and the circular economy of sustainability strategies, we need to further our measurement methods, such as life cycle assessment or LCA, so we can have quantitative values, so we can effectively engage with customers, with business leaders, with policymakers, and with the public in an engaging way. But also, sadly, this means that these tools are also prone to greenwashing and bias. So these numbers could be manipulated and they could be spreading misinformation. So there's no perfect world here. So essentially, I will conclude this of what this means for my journey in sustainable development. So we went on a non-linear journey here. We started off discovering that sustainability is not linear. Solutions focused on sustainable development in lower socioeconomic regions, they cannot be too disruptive. The solutions should be focused on income generating, and they should be focused on actually being profitable for the business for scaling. The solutions must be focused on ease of use and convenience for customers to actually adopt. And also the benefits, they need to be direct and they need to be very visible to help this adoption. Then later on in the journey, realized, okay, fossil fuels is a problem and we are locked in this fossil fuel economy, which isn't too good. And this has generated a lot of inequalities globally, which isn't too good as well. And we know that energy systems are the main culprit for this. And we have options to close the tap, drain the tub, and clean up the mess, whether it's through renewable energy or carbon capture or policy. But also, we learn from this that all of our product systems can have a massive influence on our energy systems. And we can tackle this by using the concept of the circular economy, which can shift these product systems and reduce the need for our fossil-based energy systems. But one important thing that I've learned from my journey and why I'm studying life cycle assessments and measuring sustainability is that we need these metrics to guide decisions. Now, where my journey can go next, I don't know. So, as mentioned, we went over renewable energy, we went over circular economy, we went over kind of cooking solutions in lower socioeconomic contexts, all, aligning to sustainable development. But the most important aspect that I want you to take away, and I really hope it hit home, is three key things. Sustainability isn't just, environmental sustainability or just planet. We need to focus on people, making solutions easier for them to adopt, ones that are going to improve their life and they're not going to cause all sorts of inequalities. We want to focus on planet because we don't like climate change. We don't like pollution. That's no good. But often the most overlooked one and the one who's stigmatized to say, it's very corporate and capitalistic, profit is so important. It is essentially how we function in the economy. Sustainability and sustainable options need to focus on people, planet, and profit to create a thriving planet. So thank you so much for having me. I'll take any questions and discussion. And also, last few slides, I'll be able to share the slide deck. I've offered a few books and a few resources in case you're interested. So otherwise, yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I hope that was really interesting.
It certainly was, Joris. Fascinating and very concise. Amazing overview. So let's have a visual round of applause. And now, having done little presentations, it's nice to have some feedback. You can't always hear what people are saying and feel what they're saying. So